very least, maybe the tsunami will put out some of the fires.
There is that.
That's a silver lining.
You are a silver lining person.
Hi, I'm Morgan Page, and I'm a geophysicist with the U.S. Geological Survey in Pasadena, California.
My name is Mike Angove. I'm the Tsunami Program Manager for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration.
I'm Peter Gleick, a hydrologist and climatologist from the Pacific Institute in Oakland, California.
Today we're going to be reviewing some of Hollywood's biggest disaster films and commenting on how realistic they are.
This is toward the end of the movie, and The Rock recognizes boats are tilting in a way that suggests that the water is receding.
Water being pulled out like that's a tsunami.
He's right to be thinking about that. We've just had this strong shaking. Tsunamis do tend to be associated with that type of shaking when you involve water. But here's where it starts to come off the rails. What they're depicting here is a giant tsunami generated somewhere out in the Pacific, and there it is right there. Yeah, I don't think the world has seen this large of a tsunami wave. You would need a major oceanic subduction zone type of an event to generate that type of a wave. That mechanism does not exist in this portion of the Pacific. Maybe we'd get some fracturing, the extension of the San Andreas out there, but it would all be very kind of small.
Just in first order, because of San Andreas, the land is moving horizontally. It is a bit harder to get tsunamis. You need either vertical motion of a fault to get a tsunami, or you need something where, say, the shaking causes an underwater landslide, and so that gives you the movement of the ground under the bay. But you need something a little different than you would have in, say, a subduction zone earthquake.
This one, the way it's depicted, you can safely scratch off the list.
But there is a long history of these movies taking out the Golden Gate Bridge.
Well, that's
I
true.
had to figure out a way to do that.
If that was on your checklist, take out Golden Gate Bridge, this is probably the best way to do it. I'm with you on that, Peter.
So when the earthquake hits the house, Amanda Peet and her family, they actually do the right thing in this scene initially. They drop cover and hold on. They get under a stable piece of furniture, which is offering them protection from all of the falling objects. But then John Cusack arrives and tells them to get out of there. Now, their house collapses shortly after, so I guess it was the right call given that that happened. But in reality, a wood frame house like this is one of the safest places to be in an earthquake. The scale of what we're seeing is grossly exaggerated in this clip. You know, the huge fault sculptures popping up all over the place, how they're trying to outrun the seismic waves in their car, which is impossible because they're too fast. An earthquake occurs when a fault that's been under tremendous stress suddenly begins to slip. One side of the fault moving relative to the other side. And that causes a generation of seismic waves. We could get P waves, the first thing we feel, followed by S waves, and followed by surface waves. And if you're far from an earthquake, a surface wave, which is a rolling kind of motion, is typically the main thing that you feel. So you do have the rolling motion of the earth, but we're talking about centimeters, not meters. You know, we're talking much smaller scales of destruction than what we're seeing in this movie. This scene is pretty unrealistic. I mean, the one thing I liked about it that the family originally did the right thing was then completely undone when they just had this over-the-top ground motions that destroyed what would have been probably a pretty safe place to be in the earthquake.
So we're in Antarctica. Scientists are drilling ice cores, which is something that we do. There's a tremendous amount of information you can get from ancient ice cores in Antarctica about climate, about weather, about atmospheric conditions. And then, like a good crazy scientist who's been spending his life collecting data, he jumps across the crevice to try and save some of the ice cores. The Day After Tomorrow is in some ways the best of the really crazy disaster movies. We do see ice shelves breaking off in Antarctica, enormous ice shelves the size of states, in part as a result of human-caused climate change. And as temperatures go up, we're beginning to see fracturing of those shelves sitting mostly on water at the moment. And that may accelerate the movement of land ice into the oceans, and that's what raises sea level.
I didn't do anything.
The speed we see here is not realistic. What's happening here is a very fast crevice forming and the ice shelf moving quickly. It's typically a little bit slower than that, but that's what we're seeing here.
The whole damn shelf is breaking off. That's what's happening.
In the movie Volcano, it's so hot, the rubber on his sneakers is melting. He's struggling to move as he carries an injured person off of the subway car. Wow, there's like lava just flowing down from somewhere. Windows are breaking. Oh, and there's just lava everywhere, flames. It's really far, and he's got this guy on his back. Oh, he jumps as far as he can, but it's right into the lava. As far as I know about the interaction between human body and lava, that seems realistic. If you're in a situation where there's a slow-moving lava flow, you can get fairly close, and it's not going to immediately kill you. It is realistic that stepping into lava would kill you, so as far as I know, it seems plausible. Using concrete barriers to stop a lava flow and using water to stop a lava flow, both of these things have been done in the real world. You can sometimes use concrete barriers to divert the lava. That's a little bit easier than just stopping it because it's going to keep coming. But it's been done in Hawaii and in Italy. So in the movie, it's depicted that there's a volcano right under Los Angeles. And just to be clear, there is not a volcano right under Los Angeles. There are places in the world where you do get volcanoes, but Los Angeles is not one of those places.
Lava? Here in LA.
It's one of several possibilities.
It's an iconic scene. It's a cow flying by.
Cow.
And the cow doesn't look all that perturbed.
They're wondering, is that the same cow or a different cow?
Another cow.
Actually, I think that was the same one.
Probably the scene that everyone remembers from this movie.
There is a lot of things that get, sucked up into these and distributed around. So in some
Including
ways-
livestock.
Including livestock.
The one quibble I have with this scene is that when they first see the cow, it's going one way, and then the cow, next time they see it, is going the other way. That would make sense if they're driving right through the tornado, I guess, but it looks like the tornado is off to the side, so, a tornado is not just going to suddenly switch direction. That would not be realistic. Yeah. But overall, livestock, we think that's reasonable.
Right. When the National Weather Service, contributed some technical advice and ideas to the filmmakers, and I think a lot of what's shown here shows that natural evolution in trying to better understand these systems.
Where's my truck? There it is.
One of the fundamental characteristics of almost all of these disaster movies is that they try to build on things that could be plausible, but to a more extreme sense. And so the movie starts with a series of clips from real extreme events: flooding, tornadoes, drying out of reservoirs. The worry, of course, is that we're now modifying the climate in a way that will make these more extreme events even more damaging to civilization. And now it's transitioning into massive CGI storms, a heat wave in Madrid that kills millions of people, and the global response. The world is coming together and producing what in the business we call geoengineering. Engineering options for mitigating the consequences of human influence on the climate, and they're launching satellites. Most of the geoengineering that we're talking about now is really just talk. There are ideas of things that we can do. One could argue that a massive tree planting campaign or building seawalls is small-scale geoengineering, but the scale of the geoengineering described in Geostorm, the planetary satellite systems, that's not in our near future.
In the movie The Core, birds are just flying right into monuments. Uh-oh. Oh, they're crashing into windows.
Panic.
Oh, now it's all Hitchcockian, everyone's fleeing. So that one of the premises of the movie The Core is that the outer core of the Earth has stopped spinning, so therefore there's no longer any magnetic field. So if there's no magnetic field on Earth, a compass wouldn't work, and birds use the magnetic field to migrate, so they use it to find the direction when they're migrating. The problem with this clip is that the birds would still be able to see. Even without a magnetic field, they shouldn't just be flying into buildings and statues for no reason.
How do birds navigate?
By sight.
No, the long-range stuff.
Here's a world where something has gone horribly wrong, and it's a world of dust, a world of bad weather, a world of crop failure. Historically, we've seen periods when, on a regional scale, there have been massive dust storms. The famous Dust Bowl in the 30s in the United States, there was a consequence partly of a very severe multi-year drought in the Great Plains of the US, combined with, at the time, bad farming practices. Whether or not that could happen at a global scale, if we're irresponsible with the climate and with our human practices, agricultural practices, industrial practices, I guess is an open question.
Tom's score simply isn't high enough.
Matthew McConaughey's an engineer. He's a pilot in a world now that he's told doesn't need engineers. They need farmers.
Good farmers, like you.
And again, there's a comment in the scene.
We didn't run out of television screens and planes. We ran out of food.
And there is a tension between using resources in general for basic needs versus resources for more advanced technology. That's already a tension. But we also know that we could grow a lot more food with a lot less water. We could use efficient irrigation systems. We don't have to overpump our groundwater unsustainably. We can grow crops that are more water efficient rather than water intensive. This is the only habitable planet we know of. If we make it uninhabitable, we're screwed. We can't go somewhere else. Now, he can because they have a spaceship that lets them do that, but that's not the world we live in today.
Nelson's torching his whole crop.
Light?
They're saying it's the last harvest for okra. Ever.
Okay, well, to have a Sharknado, you need sharks, number one. The next thing you have to do is you have to change the weather in Southern California. And then you need a tornado. You don't see these over the ocean that often. You need to suck the sharks up into the tornado, check. And now to really have the drama, you need a city that you can deposit these sharks out of the tornado. And Los Angeles happens to be conveniently located for that.
So you're basically saying that if we accept
All of that.
Correct. This could be a realistic movie.
There's
Maybe
no
the most
problem
realistic
here.
of the ones
Sharknado is fine.
that we've screened.
Great.
You can't just wait here and wait for sharks to rain down on us again.
Yeah, so this was a particularly bad storm, hurricane interacting with some mid-latitude weather. What you're seeing here is the attempt of the Coast Guard who's being called in to do an at-sea rescue. It really gives you, I think, a good sense of just how difficult these operations are under these conditions. It's credit to the Coast Guard that they do that. So this was, not that untypical of an Atlantic hurricane. They start to gain latitude and recurve and typically will dissipate and become part of the more mid-latitude structure, and there'll still be some strong winds and things like that, but every once in a while they get trapped in sort of this own, what you'd call maybe more of a barotropic kind of environment there, and they're able to re-intensify that core, and I believe that's what happened in this case here. So it started off as kind of any other hurricane. Ended up being a very unusual storm when it was at high latitude and probably more dangerous than you would typically see. Our computer weather models are pretty sophisticated and they do a pretty good job of showing you where these dangerous areas are going to be. If you're a seasoned mariner, working up there and you've seen these things over your lifetime, when something anomalous like this comes along, maybe you're not quite as willing to back off. I've done this is my livelihood, I know how to handle myself.
Drive right through it.
Every once in a while, something's going to come along and surprise you, and I believe this was a case of that kind of happening. I think it's an accurate depiction of the challenges faced with at-sea search and rescue operations in extreme conditions, absolutely.
This is where they separate the men from the boys.
So here we have a violently erupting volcano, and there are volcanic bombs being extruded and hitting things. Volcano bombs are a thing. When you have an eruption, you can have the lava coming out of the volcano violently, and then as it's traveling through the air, it cools and hardens, and they even tend to form aerodynamic shapes because they're hurling through the air. However, Pompeii did not have volcanic bombs. The city was actually remarkably well preserved, the buildings and such. So just from the archaeological evidence, we don't believe that Mount Vesuvius, when it erupted in 79 AD, had this type of feature. But it was a very violent eruption. In fractions of a second, killed the inhabitants just from the heat shock and basically froze that city in time as it was buried in 80 feet of ash. The actual incidence of volcanic bombs is not true, but an explosive eruption at Vesuvius killing all these people very violently, very suddenly, that's all absolutely true and did happen.
For those of us about to die, we salute.
The classic story, Noah. The earth is covered in storms. They built the ark, and now all the non-believers want to get on board. But here comes the water. There are indications in the geologic record of a massive flood that occurred in Sumerian times, 3,000 or 4,000 BC, that resulted from a geologic event that released a big body of water that caused a huge flood in the Middle East. Not a global flood, but a massive flood that probably was then passed down through word of mouth, through the legends and the myths of the people who lived there. You wouldn't get those bursts of water from the ground, but extreme rain and flooding is common. We live on a water planet. 97% of the world's water is in the oceans, and there's water in our rivers and lakes, and there's water in the atmosphere. And it cycles. We get evaporation, formation of clouds, condensation is rain and snow, back to the oceans, runoff to the oceans. There is a lot of land ice in Antarctica and Greenland, but not enough to cover the surface of the Earth. If all of the land ice melted, if all of the water were in the oceans, it would raise sea level very substantially, but even there only 100 feet at most. And so land above that level would still be out of the oceans. Without divine intervention, there's not enough water to completely cover the Earth.
The storm cannot be stopped, but it can be survived.
This is based on real events. This is Thailand, and about 500 kilometers away, we've had a magnitude 9 earthquake happen and has unleashed a tsunami in all directions. I think the scene is brilliant for a number of reasons. Number one, you see the animals. All of our eyewitness reports of tsunamis impacting usually involve the animals recognizing that something's not right. As this bore wave, this leading wave of the tsunami approaches a coastline, it makes noise, it's sort of loud, and I think they did a nice job showing that. The next thing is that you see are the palm trees go down. And that really is the first indication that there's something bad is happening. Your natural warning signs are your best indicators of a tsunami. If you feel strong shaking and it lasts for some duration, go to high ground. This is generated 500 kilometers away. They wouldn't have felt any shaking. There's almost nothing they could do. So here comes the water, but what it's doing is it's taking out mostly the ground floor. So if you had been conditioned enough to be able to get up one or better two floors, most of that water, is going to get below you. That would have been a good evacuation. After this event, we now, under the UN, have a comprehensive international forecast and warning system. And this type of tsunami will likely not happen again in this way because of the advanced warnings now. Again, but it was too late for them. We had to learn the lesson, unfortunately. Not only is that clip exceptionally realistic, if someone were to ask me what's it like to go through a tsunami, I think I would refer them to this movie. It's that detailed and that accurate.
So we're in a park in New York City, it appears. Ordinary looking breeze, but in fact it's a very menacing breeze because that's what's carrying some sort of toxin or chemical that is being emitted by plants to turn humans into suicidal zombies. Police officer has just shot himself. Another zombie person is getting out of the car, walking over to the gun. Don't do it.
What is the motivation for the plants?
The revenge
The
of the
plants are basically having their revenge on the human race for probably good reason and decided to make us off ourselves.
Well, there are plenty of plants that have all sorts of psychotropic properties, as some people may know from direct experience.
And there are plants that will hurt you if you eat them or touch them. I think the closest thing to this is there is a fungus that will cause ants to climb to the top of blades of grass that makes the ant in a way suicidal. It basically zombifies the ant and it climbs to the top of the blade of grass. So that's like the closest thing. I'm trying really hard to find something related that's plausible, and that's all I got. Clearly this is complete nonsense, but the Earth is resilient, and even if humans don't make it for whatever reason, plants likely will.
What? No.
This is one of many movies with dam failures. Water is a powerful thing.
Is that good or bad?
That's very bad.
And I guess we have a bank robbery going on here. There's Morgan Freeman. Things are erupting everywhere. And here goes the dam. As part of our water system, we build big dams. We've learned over the last 100 years how to build really big dams, and sometimes they fail. And when they fail, really bad things happen. So the way dam failures typically work is there's a weak spot, either in the dam itself that's overwhelmed by a massive flood upstream, or there's something with the geologic formation that the dam is built in, or the dam was built to the wrong standards. And once you have a little failure, you get a big failure because the power of water is so overwhelming, it punches through any weakness. And I think this is probably not an unrealistic depiction of a big dam failure.
The next time I say, let's evacuate. Let's evacuate.
We have very active supercell type of tornadoes here.
There's 3, 4, shit, they're everywhere!
A big fire now and a
big
fire-nado. There are plenty of people who run around trying to film these disasters.
True.
Yeah, that turned out to have been a mistake.
Yeah.
There it goes.
Tornadoes come from what are called supercell thunderstorms. What happens, there's a lot of up and a lot of down that's associated with that thunderstorm. The air is coming down, that air spreads out at the surface, and sometimes due to friction and other forces, you'll start to see it rotate. Every once in a while, that rotation gets literally sucked up into the supercell, which is also rotating in the same direction. And when that happens, you get what we would call a tornado.
We have seen fire tornadoes associated primarily with wildfires where you get significant temperature differences. You have a fire, you have a lot of convective activity. Fire tornadoes are a thing.
Flying debris is the big problem with tornadoes, so most would want to have some sort of underground shelter where you're shielded from that. If you can't, you want to find an interior room that isn't going to be susceptible to things flying in windows. The idea that you can have multiple tornadic outbreaks is reasonable, and I think if you happen to hit something on fire like that, it would suck the fire up. So I would say this is not a completely unreasonable depiction of a severe tornado outbreak.
Did we just beat this bastard?
It looks like it.
One of the themes of all of these disaster movies, which some of us love to watch, is whether or not humans will survive, how we'll survive, what the threats are that challenge our ability to survive. And we're not worried about all life on the planet going extinct because of these kinds of things. We're worried about humans and whether or not we're going to be smart enough to foresee and prevent the disasters that either we're responsible for or that we might see coming.
We as a species just don't have it within our capacity to look forward enough to get in front of these problems. We're very good at dealing with them when we have no other choice. I'm going to try to quote Winston Churchill here. You can really count on the Americans to do the right thing once they've exhausted every other alternative. I have a sense that when push comes to shove and we really have to step up and make a difference, we may just figure it out.
For some of these things, it's time to step up now.
Oh, I'm with you.
Yeah.